thank you very much. So I'm not going to be talking about Parkinson's disease, which is what I spend about 95% of my time doing. I'm going to be talking about nitrous oxide, and the title of the talk is Nitrous Oxide, What's the Harm? Before I start, I realise it's a mixed audience, so I thought I'd just explain my job a little bit and how this ended up being an interest of mine. So I'm a consultant neurologist, that means I'm a medical doctor, and I'm interested in disorders of the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves, and things like that. But then, as Professor Borkhill said, I'm also an epidemiologist. I have training in epidemiology, and epidemiology is the study of the causes or determinants of disease. Okay? And so when you combine those things, a lot of my focus on Parkinson's and now also nitrous oxide has been on, why do certain people get the neurological disease that they get? And also, not just that, but what can we do about it? How can we kind of reduce that? And this is a big question lecture, and I think nitrous oxide has become a big question, not just in the local area where it was a big question for the last few years, but nationally and now internationally as well. Every country seems to be having their own journey with nitrous oxide at the moment. So we're going to talk about that and really our local experience. So the first thing is, what is nitrous oxide? Has everyone seen these before? Put your hand up if you've not seen these. Maybe people are too shy, but I expect everyone in the room has seen these at some point. They're usually, well actually, you don't tend to see many of these anymore. You tend to see the bigger ones now, and I'll go on to talk about that. But for many years, this site in gutters or along the street or in parks was a really common place. These little metal canisters of compressed gas. And so when we're talking about nitrous oxide, we're talking about laughing gas. It's also known as NOS or NOx, or we call it N2O, which is the chemical name, nitrous oxide. It's a colourless, odourless gas. That means it doesn't have a smell, used typically in healthcare settings for sedation and pain relief. So women in labour, certain people who have pain disorders like sickle cell crises and things like that, nitrous oxide is administered as a gas to reduce pain and help people dissociate, leave the painful experience away. And we mix it in healthcare settings with oxygen, okay? It's also used in the food industry for whipping cream, and it's also used in the motor industry as well. These second two bullet points for engine performance and for food additives, these are legitimate uses of nitrous oxide, and so is the medical use. But actually, over the last, really 7 or 8 years, we've seen countless news articles on televised news, in newspapers, online news about people that have come to harm from nitrous oxide. This article was just published last week on BBC News. An American family, now nitrous oxide is becoming a problem in America as well. I have a lot of colleagues in the US that are neurologists, and when we started to see nitrous oxide cases in the UK, I would ask them, do you have this problem in the US? Is this really a thing? No, it's not really a problem, but now it's starting to come, and in other countries around the world as well. So we've seen lots of this in the news, lots of people coming to harm. Now, I mentioned epidemiology. This is the kind of study of the patterns or the causes of determinants of disease. And every year there's a crime survey in England and Wales, and nitrous oxide tends to come out as either the second or the third most commonly used drug in young people. In 2022-23, which was the last time it was published, about 5% of 16 to 25-year-olds say that they use nitrous oxide. This is actually much lower. It's about half what it was in 2016 and 2017. But I don't think that paints the full picture. So you might say, oh, that's a good thing. Half as many people are using it 7 years later or 8 years later. But it's only half the story, because actually what's happened is people have gone from using these little canisters to using these big cylinders. And now those little canisters that I showed at the beginning, they're quite uncommon to see those on the streets, but you see these absolutely everywhere. And in one of these cylinders, it's equivalent to about 75 of those canisters. And what I'll go on to tell you is I think that's a major reason why this change from these to these is a major reason why I think we've seen such an increase in the harm, because you can consume a lot more nitrous oxide with these than just with these. The way this works, and I should have probably put a slide in about this. But the way that you consume nitrous oxide is you have a charger which basically opens a canister and is used to inflate a balloon, and then you inhale the gas from the balloon. So if you use just one of these, you can inflate the balloon a little bit. If you use one of these, you can get a really big balloon and just really continuously breathe nitrous oxide without breathing any normal air as well. And so we think that's why people have come to more harm. So why do people take nitrous oxide? Well, first of all, it's very widely available. You can't easily buy drugs like cocaine and heroin on the internet, but you can very easily buy nitrous oxide on the internet, and it's pretty cheap. So these are the small cream chargers. There's about, what's 24 in here for £11. Websites sell it at a discount as well. If you want one of the big ones that contains the equivalent of 75, £25. Or you can buy a pack of 6 of those large ones for £130, just on regular websites. It has been for a long time perceived as harmless. It's really hard to detect, so young people can use it very easily without other people finding out, and as I say, it's widely accessible. And it does give people this very pleasurable effects. It gives this feeling of euphoria, which is a kind of heightened sense of enjoyment. It also gives people a feeling of dissociation, which is detachment from reality, and fits of laughter, laughing gas. The original, Professor Balkra was reminding me that the original kind of experiments with gases by Humphrey Davy. He was the first person to actually describe the laughing fits, the feeling of euphoria that one gets back in the days when people, when they found new compounds, would just try them out for themselves to see what the effects were. And this is the thing, it's been widely promoted on social media. So when this started to explode in, I feel in when we became aware of it exploding in 2017, 2018, there was a lot of depictions and videos of people on Snapchat and Instagram using nitrous oxide and then distributing this amongst their peers. So young people could access this material, and then they could access in the links and the comments underneath, access where to buy it from. And people, you know, on Snapchat and Instagram would advertise delivery services that would turn up at your house or turn up in the park and deliver boxes of nitrous oxide canisters. And here's a website, Cream Deluxe website. It's a very nice website, looks very professional, and you can see you can get you can buy one cylinder, 3 cylinders. You can also buy in bulk 24 cylinders if you want. There's merchandise that goes with it. I can't believe anyone would actually wear this. And now there are also different flavors as well. So, you know, this is a kind of flavorless version. Remember those small cylinders, canisters at the beginning did have a legitimate use in the food industry and for things like that. But now that they have these ones which are different flavors, watermelon, strawberries and cream and things like that, that has no legitimate use. This is really just for public, for personal consumption. And so what we started to notice was that people were coming into the hospital with symptoms and telling us, neurological symptoms mainly, and telling us that they'd been using nitrous oxide. And it was quite difficult to extract this information because people weren't at the time necessarily putting 2 and 2 together. This is a chap who was interviewed on BBC, who's talking about one of his friends actually dying from nitrous oxide use. But you can see that he himself is on crutches because of nitrous oxide use. So I'll try and play that so you can hear it.
A couple of hours ago, I just received some news. One of our close friends has passed away from taking nitrous oxide. The night before, he was taking a lot of smart whips. The next day, he didn't wake up. He died. And I just got the news a couple of hours, just a few hours ago, I just got the news that he passed away. At first, I was in denial. I said, nah, you're winding me up. Nah, you can't. Because only last week, I spoke to him. Literally last week, I just spoke to him. He was one of them people that would always say, hey, it won't happen to me. You know, I'll be okay, nothing's gonna be bad, you know, I mean, look, I'm taking B12. And what a way to die, you know, from balloons.
So I don't want to overhype this in some ways. I think that deaths due to nitrous oxide use are pretty rare. And, you know, some of the slides I'll show indicate that people don't just use nitrous oxide, and they use nitrous oxide in combination with other drugs and alcohol and things like that. But I think fatalities, deaths directly due to nitrous oxide, very rare. But this other gentleman who's recounting the story has clearly also been harmed by nitrous oxide. He's on crutches, he's a young gentleman, and now I've seen hundreds of people like this in the local area. And so this all started, as Professor Borkwill said, back in really when I came back to QMUL from UCL. So I did my PhD, I did my master's, I finished in 2016, and actually Queen's Square, which is the National Neurology Hospital, is a pretty rarefied atmosphere. Everyone's pretty well off, they all have a neurological disorder, but you don't see a lot of the kind of sharp end of disease, if you like. So I came back to the Royal London, and I was a registrar, a neurologist still in training, being called down to the emergency department to see people. And we kept having young people, always young people, late teens, early 20s, coming in with difficulty walking, tingling and numbness. They didn't volunteer it, but if you asked, problems with their bladder and bowels, sexual dysfunction, things like that. And this very consistent pattern that suggested a spinal cord injury. And we started to ask about things that they'd been exposed to and things like this. And the same thing kept coming back, that they'd been using nitrous oxide, and usually using nitrous oxide in pretty high quantities. And so there were sporadic case reports about this in the literature, just cases here and there. But we had 10 cases that we wrote up, and described the patterns of neurological problems that they had and their imaging as well. And they all had pretty much the same thing. This is an MRI scan. This is the back of the brain called the cerebellum, and this is the brainstem coming down here. And you can see where the arrow is. There's the cord, this is the spinal cord. It looks a little bit fat where the arrow is, and it's got a white signal in the middle. So this is looking at slices this way. Now this is looking at slices this way, and the arrow is showing you this upside down V, like this, which is the back of the spinal cord, which carries the nerves which control joint position sense and vibration. So the nerves which tell you where your arms and legs are in space. And when these are damaged, you feel very unsteady, particularly if the lights go out or you close your eyes, you don't know where your arms and legs are in space. But although that was the bit that was most affected, it was clear, and it's shown again here, this upside down V sign. It was clear that it was more than that, because people also had signs of neurological deficits going the other way, so affecting the nerves that control the muscles. So people would have difficulty walking, they would be falling, and as I say, bladder and bowel complaints. And so what they all had was this kind of long medical description called subacute combined degeneration of the cord. And subacute just means it didn't happen immediately, but it happened fairly quickly. Combined means that it affects different parts of the spinal cord. Degeneration means that it's getting damaged and it's not going to come back, and the cord is the spinal cord. And where you see subacute combined degeneration of the cord is when people have a deficiency in a vitamin called B12. And I'll talk a little bit more about B12 deficiency. But the key word here is the word I put in brackets, functional. And what I'll go on to show you is that nitrous oxide doesn't lower B12, but it inactivates B12. And that means that effectively you have low B12, which causes this damage. So this is shown here. B12 is the vitamin. And there are these chemical pathways which B12 facilitates. One with methylmalonic acid going to succinyl-CoA, which is needed for the healthy myelination of nerves, and another one, homocysteine to methionine, again for the healthy formation of nerves. Now, when you take nitrous oxide, your B12 becomes inactive. These pathways get blocked, and what effectively happens is the methylmalonic acid and homocysteine go up, and the succinyl-CoA and the methionine drop down, and there's myelin damage. So the nerves damage themselves. And so it's not that the B12 is low, it's that it's been inactivated and in effect gives you this functional B12 deficiency. So you don't need to remember any of this, but do remember this guy here, homocysteine, because it comes back later on in the talk. Now, what are the other causes of B12 deficiency that are not nitrous oxide? Well, you can have B12 deficiency due to diet. So you get B12 from meat and fish and dairy products and eggs. So if you're vegan or some vegetarians, you may have low B12 and you may need supplement. Certain problems with the stomach or the intestine, the pancreas, and certain drug-related causes can lower B12 as well. We saw more and more of these cases. So, as I say, now I've seen probably around 300 or 400 people with this problem, just locally. But a couple of years ago, we decided to expand our description of nitrous oxide-related neurological harm and wrote up 120 cases, and we also had some contributions not only from East London but also from Birmingham and Manchester. And a lot of these symptoms were the same: tingling, numbness, particularly in the lower limbs or in the hands, unsteadiness when walking. Some people had a limb weakness, so lower limb weakness, but very severe to the point where they were either using crutches or wheelchair bound or bed bound at home. Again, always tending to be young. It's very unusual to see nitrous oxide use sufficient to cause damage in someone over the age of 30, although I've seen a few cases. And also usually young men from an Asian ethnic group. And you might say, well, we're in East London, we're in Whitechapel, there's a lot of South Asian people in East London, but even more than the background population would suggest. There does seem to be a preponderance in men, and it does seem to be more South Asian affected than just from the background population. And the average use, when we say median, we mean average. The average use is enormous. In these 120 cases, the equivalent of 300 canisters a week. Okay, so that in those, when this started, these were boxes of 24 canisters. So what's that? More than 12 boxes a week. We had people in the first clinical series we wrote up, those 10 cases, who were using the equivalent of 2,000 a week. It's an enormous number of canisters. And so that was also the first suggestion that this is not just people using it on a Friday night for, with their friends. This is people who are using it almost habitually, must be using every day. Of those that we could follow up, again, very difficult, 120 cases, only 40 we managed to follow up to 4 weeks because most people disappear. But of those 38 people, only 4 had no symptoms. So there's a lot of residual disability in those people that we continue to see. And by this time, some people started to know about this issue that nitrous oxide was inactivating B12. So they were, 10% of people were already using B12 tablets and injections alongside nitrous oxide use to try and prevent this from happening. But we don't actually think that's very effective. And so that won't prevent you coming to harm. And then just for interest, the way we made these diagnoses definitively was having scans of the spinal cord. So that's how we define these cases as definite nitrous oxide related damage, probable or possible. For definite, they had to have an MRI scan which showed spinal cord damage. And on those scans, almost all of them were affected high up at this point of the neck in the high cervical region. It's not really clear why that is. Okay, so this is a paper that we published last year in Lancet Public Health, just showing how the reports about nitrous oxide related harm have grown over the last 25 years. So you can see these are just 1 or 2 cases a year. Here we published our series where we had 10 cases at the time. It was the biggest number, but you can see that really this started to come around 15, 16 and then upwards. And actually, as I mentioned, I would be talking to colleagues in different parts of the world saying, do you have this as a problem? Is this a thing you see? And now people are getting in touch, and for the last few years getting in touch saying we're seeing it everywhere, wherever, there are lots of people coming into the hospital. And here we've divided it down by what type of harm people have come to, whether it's neurological, respiratory, which is lung, burns around the mouth, mental health problems, heart problems, blood clots. You can see that in blue is the neurological descriptions, and they're really the thing that predominate. Okay, so this was a big problem. And so, if we go back to the the question at the beginning of this lecture, nitrous oxide, what's the harm? You can see that there's a lot of harm with this, a lot of neurological harm, and at least from some of the things we were seeing, that in a proportion of these people, the deficits and the problems that they have may be very long-standing. And so we've answered the question, what's the harm? There's a lot of harm associated with nitrous oxide. But also, you know, with taking the epidemiology hat off for a minute and starting to think, you know, as a clinician, we really turn our attention to what can we do about this. We see that this is a real problem in the local community, so what can we do about it? And so we decided that we needed to create a way of managing people that have come to harm in a very standardized way. What was happening was I was on call at the hospital on a Thursday, and if people were admitted to hospital on a Wednesday, I would see them on the Thursday. They'd stop taking, I'd ask them about nitrous oxide for a start. No one else was asking about it. I'd ask them about nitrous oxide. I'd tell them this is the problem. You've got to stop taking it. Start them on B12 injections and then make sure that they got their B12 injections until they were feeling better. But if they came in on a Thursday, they saw someone else on Friday, none of that was happening, and they may be discharged with a whole load of investigations being inconclusive and no solid treatment plan. Or, you know, discharged to for the GP to give B12 injections, and I think anyone that's tried to arrange a GP appointment in the last few years will realise that that's just a total, it's just not possible at the moment. It's not the fault of GPs, but the healthcare system doesn't function like that. We can't just expect GPs to pick something up the next day and then support it for 2 weeks. So we needed to develop a pathway in the trust. We were also concerned about high admissions to the hospital. This hospital is always full. It's always impossible to get a bed. There's always a 24-hour or 36-hour wait in the emergency department. But most of all, we were worried about the patients and the fact that in those people that we had followed up, most of them did have residual deficits. And these, remind you again, these are young people with pretty life-altering deficits. So this is probably going into too much detail, but the way that the hospitals are organised is the kind of level of crisis is called Opal 1 to 4. Opal 4 is the hospital in the biggest degree of crisis. It means that the pressure on the healthcare system in that hospital is so great that it's unable to deliver comprehensive care, and increased potential for patient care and safety to be compromised. And the Royal London really exists a lot of the time in Opal 4, and so anything we can do to reduce the pressure on beds and the pressure on inpatient investigations and move people to a place where they can be better managed is really important. And of course, in East London, as I say, we were seeing a lot of particularly South Asian males affected, high number of those in East London. And you know, largely this is a part of London that is not particularly affluent and therefore doesn't come high you know, to attention when things do go wrong. So we were aiming with our pathway to avoid unnecessary admissions, engage this patient group to understand what's going on here, streamline treatment and enhance and improve the outcomes for people, but also to reduce cases through education. So I'll talk about all of those things. And I'll maybe skip over that, but as we developed this pathway, you know, we thought about patients at the centre of it. I'm a neurologist, interested in the brain. We had the same-day emergency care department, which was run by the medical team, the emergency department, then physiotherapists, GPs, we always let them know what's going on, the drug and alcohol team, and, you know, I'm also an academic. So there was a research element to this. And perhaps most crucially, after the patients, were the QMUL medical students. And I'll talk about the absolutely crucial role that the QMUL medical students have played in all this. So we developed this pathway. I'm not going to go into details with this. It's all very long-winded, and we published the pathway in 2023, and this was then adopted by the national body for neurologists, which is the Association of British Neurologists, as the way that you should manage people with nitrous oxide-related harm. So what would happen is people would come into A&E, or they'd be referred by their GPs with symptoms that were suspected due to spinal cord damage, and if there was a history of nitrous oxide use that could be extracted from the individual, they were given treatment with B12 on that first day in the emergency department, told this is related to your nitrous oxide use, you must stop, so abstain and give B12 injections straight away and refer to the same-day emergency care pathway. So no one got admitted from that point. Okay, they didn't come in for lots of investigations, spend 4 days in hospital with people scratching their heads and not getting any of the treatment that they needed. So everyone got referred to that pathway. And then what would happen is the pathway was standardized for everyone. So they would be signed up to the pathway. They would come Monday, Wednesday, Friday for their B12 injections, and they would be assessed neurologically at the first appointment to see what the extent of the problems were, and then every 2 weeks then henceforth, and their treatment with B12 would continue for as long as they were improving neurologically. Okay, so once they plateaued, so not everyone got better at that point, once we saw a tail off in the improvement, then we continued the B12 injections for another 2 weeks, and if there was still no improvement, then we'd stop treating at that point, and it'd be physiotherapy and another kind of therapies-led follow-up. But everyone was managed in the same way. We have a meeting every 2 weeks where we discuss all the cases that have come into the pathway, and it's with a consultant physician, so a medical doctor, me as a neurologist, and then we have a junior doctor that works on this and a nurse. And so I don't see all of the cases, but I hear about all the cases, and we decide how long we're going to treat for. And if there's something we don't like in the story, something that doesn't make sense for nitrous oxide, then they get referred to my clinic, and I'll investigate them for any of the other possibilities that could be causing their spinal nerve damage. But an important part of this was getting patient feedback. We set up this pathway, but we've iterated it at least 7 times over the last few years since 2021. People don't respond to letters, people don't respond to emails, so text messaging is the way that we engage with the patients. We actually use WhatsApp rather than SMS messages. And we've also, I'll show you that we've incorporated quite a lot of feedback around letting people do their B12 injections themselves. We give them a leaflet at the beginning about what to expect from the pathway, when they need to come. Treatment spans 2 to 4 weeks. You'll see a doctor every 2 weeks to assess your symptoms. If your symptoms resolve or there's no more improvement, you'll be discharged, so people know what to expect. But as long as people are improving, we'll keep treating them, usually up into the 12 or 14-week mark. We're pretty strict, so if people miss their appointments and don't tell us, if they miss 2 consecutive appointments, the nurses are very busy, so we discharge them at that point. We will accept people back if they're re-referred. And we do have provision to move it to primary care as long as the GPs can accommodate it. And we produce kind of written information for GPs that want to manage this themselves. So it's a kind of pathway that's very much like ours, but for primary care rather than in same-day emergency care. And so this is really the number of patients that we've had on the pathway since June 22. So now we're in June 2025, so this is the last month. And you can see this is the number of new referrals. So we just, the patients that are already on the pathway, we have to discuss them every 2 weeks to decide whether they're discharged or whether they stay on for another 2 weeks. But these are the number of new referrals. And what you can see here, summer of 22, summer of 23, is 2 kind of pretty obvious peaks in use over the summer months. This is really when people use nitrous oxide more recreationally. It's a bit less convincing this year. And so does anyone know what happened here in November 23? No? So I'll talk about this towards the end, but this is when the government banned nitrous oxide and made it a Class C drug. And so I was talking to Professor Borkwell earlier on about, preparing these talks, and as you're preparing them, you start to look through the slides and the data, and you think, yeah, something is interesting going on there. So we don't seem to have that same summer peak. What we seem to have, and it varies, month to month, but what we seem to have is more kind of consistent use throughout the year, but without that summer peak. And so we're going to go back and look at this. My impression actually was that the cases had dropped over the last year since that, or last 18 months since nitrous oxide was banned under the Misuse of Drugs Act. But actually, I added all these up, and the average number of new cases per week is 7, and there's 95 here, and there's 90 in this 12-month period, and there's 95 in this 12-month period. So it's exactly the same number of people over a 12-month period, they're just a bit more spread out. And so I wonder, I don't know, but we'll start to look at this, but I wonder if, and we obviously need another few more years to look at this, but I wonder if what the ban has done is put people off using it in a kind of social summer setting, but the people who use and use regularly continue to use and maybe use to a greater extent. So then something else interesting happened. We were seeing all these people with neurological problems, and then we started to get alongside, and we didn't notice it at first, but we started to get cases that also had blood clots. And so between March 23 and August 23, we saw 50 new patients on the pathway for their nitrous oxide related spinal cord damage, nerve damage. But amongst those, 4 had recent or concurrent, meaning at the same time, blood clots. And you might say, well, 4 blood clots is not that exciting in a hospital. But bear in mind, again, these are all young people, usually under the age of 25. It's a bit odd that they were getting blood clots as well. And so we started to look into this a little bit more, and we did an audit in the hospital where we said, okay, all the people that are referred to the same-day emergency care department that are under the age of 35, let's look to see who of those has a blood clot that's explained and who of those has an unexplained blood clot. And and there were a couple of hundred of those, but it's about 28 or 30 that didn't have an explanation for their blood clot, again, all under the age of 35. We called all of them up, and 30% of them reported using nitrous oxide recreationally at the same time, which is a really high proportion, actually. And so, there is a mechanism for this. So if we go back to the diagram I showed, where I showed that if you inactivate B12, you get a reduction in methionine. It's because the conversion of homocysteine to methionine is not happening because the B12 is inactivated. High homocysteine is associated with blood clots. Okay, and that's known previously. People that have had a heart attack, if you measure homocysteine, their homocysteine levels are raised. People who've had a stroke, same thing, their homocysteine levels are raised. So there's a mechanism for this. People with high homocysteine are at risk of blood clots. And so we believe this is another kind of causal relationship. And so when we look at those 8 people who said that they were using nitrous oxide, this is their duration of nitrous oxide use, the years along the bottom, duration of nitrous oxide use, and the X on each of these shows when their blood clot happened. And you can see for all, apart from this one here, their clot occurred either during their nitrous oxide use or just immediately after. And so this is something that we now have incorporated in the pathway, actively looking for blood clots and things like that. And, I have a case, I don't show the case here, but I have a very sad case of a young man who, in New Year's Eve of 22, I was the neurology consultant on call, and he was admitted with a very large blood clot in his brain and a lot of brain swelling. And he needed surgery to take the top of his skull off to release the pressure, and he went to the intensive care unit, and he didn't have a cause for his blood clot, and he had very mild COVID positive test, and so we assumed that his blood clot was due to COVID. And at the time there was a lot of talk about COVID being linked to blood clots, and then COVID vaccines being linked to blood clots and things like this. Anyway, he survived, and I followed him up, and he had epilepsy afterwards, and we put him on blood thinners for the clot, and then we ultimately took him off. And I was speaking to the hematologist about it, and the hematologist said, I just don't believe that this very mild COVID positive test is the explanation for his blood clot. And then this was in amongst us doing all this, and I thought, maybe he was using nitrous oxide. And then when I asked him, he was using nitrous oxide by the bucket load just in the run-up to his clot. And sadly, he died 3 months ago from his epilepsy. So he survived in the short term, but not in the long term. So there's a lot of, what's the harm? There's a lot of harm. Okay. I haven't said anything about the non-medical harms, but one of the main reasons why the government ultimately banned nitrous oxide, and I'm not sure that I'm in agreement with the ban, but one of the major things that was the driver for Priti Patel and the government at that time was antisocial behaviour. Driving has never been formally surveyed, but has anyone in the room ever seen someone driving using nitrous oxide? I've seen it. I was walking down the roads with my kids, Essex Road in Islington with my kids, and a car went straight across the road and hit a bollard, and the doors open and the guy had a big balloon in his mouth. This one is unbelievable. So this is in Tower Hamlets. This is a Mercedes that's just hit a bollard. The guy gets out with a balloon, gets back in the car with a balloon, and as he drives off, you can see the pink in the front seat, both him and the driver who's just crashed are still inhaling their balloons. And just to show, this was recently, Eid 2025, crash in a tunnel linked to nitrous oxide. And you would look at this and think this is all young Asian males, and certainly is an excess, but it's not only young Asian males. This is an article from 3 weeks ago in the Manchester Evening News. This young teen who was using nitrous oxide crashed into an 80-year-old woman who luckily survived. So I think this is a major issue. I've seen 2 cases just in front of me myself. One of the things we realise is there's the potential for a bit of a vicious cycle here. So of the people that we saw and we wrote up, those 120 cases, 60% of them, even though they were young, had no current involvement in education or employment. Of course, if you have neurological damage that persists, henceforth, it's much harder to gain employment and go back to education. And we're also a little bit worried, not a little bit worried, but kind of worried about the potential for marginalisation and how the law might affect people and lead to racial profiling. And then another thing that was cited in the government's investigation into this is the kind of environmental harms. The littering, 5 tonnes of canisters after Notting Hill Carnival in 2023. Similar Notting Hill Carnival 2020, yeah, that's 23, that's 22. And some arguments that there's an effect on climate change, particularly if use is so high. And we're kind of doing some work right now. Laura Smith, who's a health psychologist at the Centre for Preventive Neurology, and one of our research assistants, Isabel Symes, is looking into the social determinants of health. And there's a lot of information to kind of explore here and further work to be done. I mentioned this in 2021. The then Home Secretary, Priti Patel, decided that she wanted to ban nitrous oxide, and she commissioned the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs to look into the health and social harms associated with nitrous oxide and give the government advice on what they should do, whether they should continue to control it under the Psychoactive Substances Act or whether it should be controlled as a Class C drug under the Misuse of Drugs Act. I was co-opted into this Advisory Council for the Misuse of Drugs based on our work on the neurological harms at the time. And we, as an advisory group, advised against criminalisation. We said that's not the answer. It doesn't work in other areas of drug use. But we do think we should clamp down on sale for non-legitimate use, like these websites that are, not even hiding, selling in plain sight, and do more to understand the social harms, do more to educate young people in the public, and really legislate more on the legitimate uses. And I haven't said, but there was a time, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but most of the newsagents around here, you could go in and buy nitrous oxide from under the counter. But ultimately, the government rejected the advice and did make nitrous oxide illegal under a Schedule C classification. And here is, again, this article from Lancet Public Health where we talked about the kind of legal status in other countries. We wrote a letter to the Lancet saying that we were concerned about the government making nitrous oxide illegal because we were worried that that may cause young people who had been using nitrous oxide and had come to harm to be less likely to come forward to hospital, more likely to sit at home with their symptoms. Maybe they'd stop nitrous oxide, maybe they wouldn't, but they wouldn't come to hospital and start treatment, which is what we think you absolutely need to do if you start to get symptoms. And so this is what happened 8th of November 2023. Those found in unlawful possession will face either an unlimited fine, a visible community punishment, or it's very Victorian, isn't it? Or caution. Serious offenders may face prison sentence of up to 2 years and an unlimited fine or both. For supply or production, this will double for up to 14 years in prison or an unlimited fine or both. So pretty serious punishments. And again, if you're a 16-year-old who's been using nitrous oxide and you've developed tingling feet, you're struggling to walk, this may put you off coming to a hospital for several weeks. And certainly, you know, anecdotally in my clinical practices, I've seen people that have put it off because they didn't want to get into trouble. So that is still what we're worried about. But we've not just kind of worked on the medical pathway in the hospital, but we've done a lot of education as well. And when I say we, medical students at QMUL, I realised very early on in this that me going out to schools and talking to people wasn't going to be great. And actually, people that were much closer to the age or even in the age group of the target audience would be much more credible. And so it's worth mentioning Devon Mayer and Safia Zaloom, who are two amongst several, who set up this Know the Risk campaign, which has been phenomenally successful. And so I just want to give a bit of time to talk about the work that they've done. Here's a poster, an electronic poster board outside the Tower Hamlets Mosque. I've walked past this and seen this before. They do interactive workshops with students in Tower Hamlets schools and colleges. So they engage students with different activities. So, which you've got to pin this on the parts of the body that you think can be damaged by nitrous oxide, decoding images, what do the symptoms of nitrous oxide feel like? Because, you know, for a lot of I think the message has got out to a lot of young people now, but in the beginning, lots of people didn't know if the symptoms that they were having were due to nitrous oxide and thought they could be due to any other things. Various games to show what damage to myelin over that sheaths and nerves will do, and then these action cards as well. And this has really been supported by Tower Hamlets Council and the Osmani Trust, which is a local charity, who now the Know the Risk campaign, the medical student campaign, developed the content and then handed it over to the Osmani Trust. And now the Osmani Trust and the medical students have delivered workshops to over 3,000 people in Tower Hamlets. Here's a map of where these have been. These have been phenomenally successful, and we share the materials with other boroughs and regions. And, you know, at the end, we ask students what they understand about the risks of nitrous oxide, and this is a word cloud from 650 odd students. And you can see that the key messages are coming out. You know, damages spinal cord, dangerous, pins and needles, permanent bad, etc., etc. This got picked up by BBC News the week that the government banned nitrous oxide, so I'll just show that. I think this is a good way of capturing it, and picked up by multiple news channels as well.
Good evening and welcome to BBC London. I'm Alice Bandukravi. First tonight, the ongoing row over nitrous oxide, or laughing gas as it's known, a drug banned this week as part of a government crackdown on antisocial behaviour. You might have seen the silver barrels littering the pavement. The clear-up is often a headache for councils. Just look at this, that's 5 tonnes of containers collected after Notting Hill Carnival. In a moment, we'll hear from a mother who lost her son to solvent abuse and a drug expert who is against the government's ban. But first, this report with a campaigner warning youngsters in East London of the dangers of nitrous oxide. This
is Devon from the Know the Risk campaign. He can explain it to you much better than I can.
Okay, maybe a better question. Hands up if you haven't seen these before. Okay, I think that speaks for itself.
Everyone here had seen them, and take a walk in pretty much every London park and you'll see them too. Nitrous oxide canisters, a common sight across the capital.
You've got to walk heel to toe, so your heel must touch your toe every time.
It's a drug used mainly by 16 to 24-year-olds, which is why these medical students are out talking to teenagers across East London, warning of the problems it can cause.
This person has lost control of their bladder when they didn't mean to as a result of the damage of nitrous oxide. So nitrous oxide damages the spinal cord, and we have nerves coming off the spinal cord that go to our bladder.
Their main message is about the damage that nitrous oxide can do to the spinal cord, a message they deliver to groups about once a week.
In East London and across the country, there have been increasing cases of neurological damage from nitrous oxide. Okay. Some people say that those cases are rare, but at the Royal London Hospital there's sometimes a case a week. So this is definitely a new problem and a problem that needs a preventative approach. And that's why we provide these workshops, to give young people the knowledge that they need when they go out into the world to know that nitrous oxide can cause neurological and spinal cord damage.
When the gas comes out, the cancer is very, very cold, so you can get blisters from the extreme cold, you know, like frostbite.
It's been a morning of learning.
Some stuff about the spinal cord, I knew some stuff and stuff I didn't really know, but at least it's more in depth.
It was very interesting. There was lots of facts about the effects of the laughing gas, and it was just really like the type of bodies that can be affected by the laughing gas.
Really interesting. I liked that they gave us like different facts about how it affects different parts of our body and how it can do affect us long term as well.
Lessons they hope they'll take away and share with their friends. Carl Mercer, BBC London.
Okay, and that's really me coming to the end. You know, it's been, this started with some observations. I was spending my time thinking about the epidemiology and causes of Parkinson's and wandering around seeing patients at the Royal London when all this kind of unfolded in front of me, and recognising that this was an issue. We decided to take it forward. Professor Borkwell also asked me who's been funding this. I mean, really no one's been funding this. This has all been, this has certainly not kept the lights on at my house. This has really been something of interest, and with me and other colleagues and medical students has been something that we've explored. And I think I'm kind of really proud of the work that we've done to describe the burden of the issue and start to put in place measures for people that effective measures for people that have come to harm, and also education measures to try and reduce the burden. We are still working on several projects. So we have a project about what happens to people long term that have been harmed through nitrous oxide. As I said before, it's very difficult because lots of people don't keep coming back to you over time. So either people get better and they don't come back and you don't find out what happened to them, or they stay the same and they don't come back. But also there's a lot of flux in East London. People come and go from East London quite a lot. We've still got more to do in terms of the pathway development, and also showing that this is cost effective by reducing admissions. That's the thing that the NHS is most interested in, where we can save money and reduce the pressure on the system. Continuing community outreach through educational workshops. One of the things that I'm very interested in is the links with mental health and also violence. My sense is that some of the really high quantity use is among people that have been exposed to violence or have been perpetrators of violence themselves. And remember, I said right at the beginning that nitrous oxide is a very effective way of dissociating from reality. If you've seen bad things, or you've done bad things, or you've had bad things done to you, then high quantity nitrous oxide use is a very good way to detach from that. And a number of people, a significant number of people that we've seen have been to prison in and around their time with us due to gang-related offences or involvement. And measuring the impact of the change on the law and improving clinical coding. I'll maybe skip over this, and I've said a little bit about this already. It's really nice that now actually people are recognising the work that have been done and has been done. And again, to highlight, this is not all me. This is Laura Smith, health psychologist at the Centre for Preventive Neurology, Isabel Sims, who's a research assistant working with both of us. Here's Barbara Onan, who is an acute medical consultant who's done loads for the nitrous oxide pathway, Joe Walton, who kicked this off, and then Eunice, who is also Miss Garner, but is a nurse at the Royal London Hospital and has been the nurse working with us for ages, and then Marta Patejovic and Mo Hashi. These have been our two funded nitrous oxide fellows for the last couple of years. So there's a whole team here, and Devon and Safia, who are not in here. And these are the various awards that this, either the pathway or the education programme have either been runner-up for or have won in the last year. There's a website, medical student website, which I can leave up at the end, and then just to highlight the people that have done so much on this. And so I'll finish there. Thank you.